lots that I want to go through with you guys this evening. But do you know what? Do you know how much so-called dirty money is apparently laundered in London and UK Crown dependencies? 40% of it, apparently. That figure, Aaron, actually stopped me in my tracks. 40% of all dirty money coming in our general direction in some way, shape or form. Why do you think that is?
I thought it was higher. I think historically it would have been higher, but I suppose there are new kids on the block in Central America and I suppose Cyprus, Malta. There's a few questions here that I think are worth raising. Firstly, Britain is not a world power anymore. You know, it cannot change the fate of nations like it could 100 years ago. It can on global tax evasion because of all these crown territories playing such a prominent role. That's the first thing. Often we have these very abstract debates around this or that issue elsewhere, and people say, well, what can we do? Not much. OK, well, this is not that kind of issue. We can actually do a great deal if we set an example here with regards to the crown territories and dependencies, from Jersey to the West Indies. That's the first point. Secondly, tax evasion and tax avoidance are just such extraordinarily huge issues. And when I hear the word corruption and tax, I'd want to fan the conversation out ever so slightly. Evasion is a huge issue, but avoidance as well really does get my goat. So if you look at a great British brand like Cadbury or Boots, employs people here, pays tax here, it's bought by US private equity, they relocate the tax base to somewhere like Switzerland, they lay off the UK employees, awful, 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 and that's business as usual. I think that's corrupt. But we don't think
what's
it is
corrupt about that? You might not like it.
Yeah.
It might be a practice that you would prefer didn't happen. You might want to keep that employment, investment or whatever within this country. But just because you don't like something doesn't mean it's corrupt.
Sure, we shouldn't be letting people outside the UK buy a British business to lay off British workers and to give less tax to the British taxpayer and
so
the
you
exchequer.
want to operate in a closed market then? So you don't want to do business internationally?
No, I just think we should operate more. The Americans don't do that, for instance, or the French. You know, I think we are far too prone to giving our companies away. Of course it is.
What's corrupt about it?
I think it's deeply corrupt. If, for instance, let me give you the example of Cadbury.
We own foreign companies.
Not to the same extent, we don't. Not to the same extent. If you also look at US ownership of British companies, it's extraordinary. In the last 20 years, it has...
Extraordinary, but you're not explaining what's corrupt.
Well, I think it is corrupt if you're allowing people outside the UK to buy UK assets, to lay off British workers, to move the tax domicile of that business. I think that's bad. I think that's probably worse than what this is.
Well, can I just come back to...
Go on.
Let's come back to what we're talking about. We're talking about British dependencies, and we're talking about money laundering here, and it's, of course, it's not to be sniffed at all. But I know for a fact, you know, however popular or unpopular we might or might not be, we certainly this government have tried very hard to try and put in place much tougher legislation when it comes to this area, and we've also been dealing quite a bit when we've looked at sanctions and Russian money. I mean, London is known as sort of, I don't know, London whatever now, and that's been going on for years because we've had massive investment from all over the world. What I smiled at here when I had a look at it was the British Virgin Islands and the Cayman Islands, which they're talking about. Two gorgeous places, actually, I must say. Be lovely for holidays. But apparently the ministers there had turned around and said, well, the thing is, they did look into this. This is about getting registers, so everything's in the public eye of who owns what. But because of an ECJ ruling, she said that could infringe on people's human rights. So what we have is now these arguments that we've had, whether it's on illegal immigration or whether it's on whatever it's on the European Court of Justice, it has spread its tentacles right across to the debate on the British Virgin Islands and the Cayman Islands. So that's going to be fascinating to see how that works out. Apparently they're now looking into it to see if they can or they will or are prepared to actually, I think, clamp down more on the situation that they're in. But it's quite fascinating when you see that there's actually an ECJ judgment on this about the information that they or we would give out on people who are investing in our country or taxpayers as general.
And I mean, if you've got eyesight that works and you go to a variety of different cities, and you might have even have been with me on one of these lives. I remember doing a live GB News, Jubes & Co, and the audience, they were talking about the amount of, I think it was Turkish barbershops or some kind of barbershop that had sprouted up like I don't know what on their streets. And, you know, there was many suggestions previously that some of these establishments that are popping up, whether it's barbers or whatever, they're not necessarily dealing just in the business of hairdos.
Yeah.
And, you know, when it comes to money laundering, do you think that we need to be tougher? I mean, you're saying, Jacqueline, that you brought in all these legislations or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's
whether people comply then to it.
Yeah, but
and trying to make sure that it's actually, you know, being complied with.
But do you think we're tough enough on this stuff?
Well,
you're talking.
That's a separate issue on the barber shops. We know that there's a black economy. The drugs trade in this country are going to be working. A lot of it's on cash, and we know there's probably cash going all over the place. But equally, then money's going abroad and it's coming, you know, backwards and forwards. It's quite complex, actually.
The barbershops get a tough old time. I'm sure some of them are a bit dodgy. There are so many restaurants, cafes, bars where I live and where I'm from, Bournemouth. They open. Nobody goes in there for 2 years. You never see them open. They close again. Oh. It's far more common than we realise. So that's the first point. Secondly, just to go back, because that might have seemed...
But who's banging on these? Because I can think, I mean, I've just got an image.
But that's like Jacqueline says, that's the black economy. That's slightly different, right? So that's illegal businesses trying to clean their money.
They're still laundering money.
This is legal businesses trying to basically evade tax by going to different jurisdictions.
And you was also talking about tax avoidance, and that's legal. I would argue, who on earth is going to want to pay, whether you're a corporation or an individual, whatever, who on earth is going to want to pay more tax than you legally have to?
Well, you know what? Do you know who had to pay money to the IRS? And I think maybe 5-6 years ago, do you know who had to pay £100,000?
Who?
Boris Johnson, because he was a dual national to the United States. The IRS chased people around the world to get their money. Yet in this country, we say, well, if you can dodge it, good luck to you. Well, the Americans don't think that. Yep. Take the example of Starbucks. They have been operating in this country for over 20 years. They didn't pay, I believe, a penny of corporation tax until about 2021 because their tax domicile was in the Netherlands. So any profits they're making in this country were being run back through the Netherlands. They would do all sorts of financial shenanigans to basically not record a profit. Starbucks is very profitable in the UK, so they weren't paying taxes on their profits in the UK. And that's the kind of thing, I think that's corrupt.
But this is where the difficulty comes in, because, as you quite rightly say, tax avoidance is not illegal. People will have an accountant to make sure that they're not paying tax that they need not pay, so they can avoid paying tax. What we're looking at is actually tax evasion, which is a completely different thing, and it is illegal. I do believe, I actually agree with you on certain companies that we know that have been here for a long, long time. But, of course, we also have British companies that are registered abroad, and then they're trading and they're doing whatever it is around the world, and probably reciprocal. It's a similar sort of situation. I don't think there's an easy. We live in times of open markets and trade, which we don't want to close.
Take their passports away.
But I think by the same token, of course, individuals may.
Whose passports are you going to take off?
There are people who domicile their business in these different jurisdictions, UK nationals. They go live there. They go live in Monaco, or whatever, for 25 years. And then
they're only F1 drivers.
Yeah, but finish, because I'm fascinated by what you're saying. So
they've benefited from this country, whether it's its education system or its healthcare system or just the rule of law, its culture, and then they think they can opt out. And I think, you know what, there should be costs for that. But there aren't costs right now.
Pull the other one. So let me get this straight.
Yeah, I mean it.
So you
reckon fraud going on in this country, never mind people hopping to live in Monaco.
So you reckon that someone, they live in the UK, and I mean, heaven forbid, I dread to imagine how much tax that they will have paid.
Oh, they don't pay any. The really rich don't pay any tax, you know that.
They will have been paying.
Not the really rich.
They will have been paying more than their fair share when you actually look comparatively of tax. So they're paying into a system. And by the way, they probably, when you look at what they're drawing out of that system, they probably put their kids in private education. They probably have private healthcare.
Yes.
So they're probably drawing out of the state very little. So that's what I mean in terms of paying over the odds. So they've contributed massively. They've probably got businesses here that employ people. They pay all of those kind of taxations. And then they might decide to go and live in a lower tax country, wherever, I don't know, whatever, Dubai, Monaco, whatever you want to describe. And then you want to take their passport off.
Let me give you
ridiculous.
I'll give you an example. Let me give you an example.
No, hang on.
Philip Green.
This is the left view.
No, it's not. Philip Green, a billionaire.
Yes.
He made himself. He enriched himself by destroying the pension funds of BHS workers in this country. He wasn't paying a penny tax on a bunch of dividends he awarded himself through his wife because he was in Monaco. And we give the man a knighthood. No, we should have taken his passport away.
Let's not forget on the left, my little left friend here, the great famous Robert Maxwell.
He was a crook.
And the pension funds and the years it took for the pensioners to try and get recompense on that. So there are individuals. We can all bring up individuals.
No, it's not a political point, Jacqueline.
No, what we are talking about,
party political point.
In general, what we need is a robust tax system that people pay fair tax. I am, with my Thatcherite policies, basically a low tax, small state politician. I don't want the state taking more tax from you out there or from any of us that waste half of it half of the time.
The point is the ultra-rich don't pay any tax.
As much as your money as you can, but we need a fair system to do that. We also need to clamp down. The biggest problem isn't the Cayman Islands. The biggest problem is the fraud that's within the system and the waste. And that's amounting to billions. And they're areas that we're having to try to tackle as well. Whether it's in the social security system, whether it's waste when you're looking at the NHS. I mean, when you're looking at great big organisations, and because also it's not their money, they're state-owned, the waste that comes in, it's not just in the UK. This happens, obviously, in other countries. I've lived in 4 other countries. You know, they all got education and health systems and social security systems. And it is a common problem. And it's how you then try to deal with that fairly. But, you know, the public at the end of the day, they work very hard. I work for 40 years before you get your state pension and everything like that. But, you know, at the end of the day, you pay your tax, but I don't see why people really, they're only on a 40%. They're not on high salaries. You know, and they're paying more than half.
Well, the ultra-rich
they're paying more than half the salaries.
The ultra-rich pay capital gains. They pay themselves in dividends, and then they pay 20% tax, not 40%.
A small proportion, basically, of those employed or living in this country. But they pay a whack of tax for high earners.
Aaron, I'm trying not to spontaneously combust.
Go on, Michelle.
And what? So if people
That's fine.
Those
are the rules. We should change the rules. I agree.
So you want to tax like capital investments and returns, capital gains and stuff. You want to tax capital gains the same as income?
Yeah, I think it should be equalised.
Why? Because the money that you're using to purchase said assets is post-tax
Well, no, because
profit.
people pay themselves through capital gains. So for people watching this, they might be paying 40% on their income. The ultra-rich pay themselves 20% because they're earning income not through work but through wealth, i.e. capital gains. Yeah, I don't think a cleaner should be paying a higher rate of tax than a billionaire who's earning dividends. I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah, but
it's not like with like.
Just to be clear,
you have to live in the real world.
I do live in the real world. There are many countries where they're broadly equal, actually.
Just to be clear, by the way, these things like your dividend tax and your capital gains tax and stuff, they're not just random schemes, these kind of rates set up for different people. If, to use your example, a cleaner wants to go and invest in something, she's still going to have the same dividend tax as another person would do.
OK, well, if a cleaner wants to buy, equity in a FTSE 100 company, then fine, then we can have that conversation.
Well, maybe they do. You've got a very dim view of cleaners. They are. Maybe they are having side hustles and investing.
16 million people in this country have less than £100 in savings. They're not investing in the stock market.
You can stick £100 savings in the stock market.
He's underestimating the blue-collar sector. There's a lot of wily people who saved up well, bought their houses, bought their houses.
Right. I've been told for 2 minutes now that I've got to go to a break.